Hey YouTubers, it's me, Lonnie Clark, Nuts for Art, Beyond Extinction Love. I'm going to read another chapter of this where we picked off. We left off at the bottom of page 61. And if you remember, they were headed to Hattiesburg and the driver didn't let them off, so one of the guys pissed in the back of the bus. And this is where they're at, and they just decided nobody else was going to do it, right? So this was the end of it. The last sentence, I'll read you the last sentence that they were to sing. The whites would start claiming that we were unfit, that Negroes did not even know enough to go to the restroom. They just did it in the back of the bus, never mentioning, of course, that the driver would not let us off. I'm going to hold the book up like this. It's better for me. The driver's bullish voice attracted our attention. "Didn't you hear me call you?" he asked as Bill climbed the steps. "I sure didn't," Bill said pleasantly. "You deaf?" "No, sir." "You mean to stand there say you didn't hear me call you?" "Oh, were you calling me?" Bill asked innocently. "I heard you yelling, 'Boy,' but that's not my name, so I didn't know who you meant. I didn't know you meant me." Bill returned and sat beside me, surrounded by the approval of his people. In the immense tug of war, such an act of defiance turned him into a hero. As we drove more deeply into Mississippi, I noted that the Negro comforted and sought comfort from his own. Whereas in New Orleans, he paid little attention to his brother. In Mississippi, everyone who boarded the bus at the various little towns had a smile and a greeting for everyone else. We felt strongly the need to establish friendship as a buffer against the invisible threat. Like shipwrecked people, we huddled together in the warmth and courtesy of that was pure and pathetic. The threat grew as we penetrated deeper towards the center of the state. The distance between the whites and the blacks grew tangibly greater, even though we saw only the backs of their heads and shoulders, their hats and the cigarette smoke rising from them as night fell and the bus lights switched on. They said nothing, did not look back, but hostility emanated from them in an unmistakable manner. We tried to counter it by being warm and kind to one another, far more than strangers usually are. Women discussed where they lived and promised to visit one another, though all knew that such visits would never take place. As we neared Poplarville, agitation swept through the bus. Everyone's mind was on the Parker youth lynching and the jury's refusal to consider the FBI's evidence against his lynchers. "Do you know about Poplarville?" Bill whispered. "Yes." Some of the whites looked back. Animated Negro faces turned stony. Bill pointed out places in a quiet, expressionless voice. "That's the jail where they snatched him. They went up to his cell, the bastards, and dragged his feet and dragged him down so his head bumped against each stair step. They found blood on them and the blood at the bottom landing. He must have known what they were going to do to him. He must have been scared shitless." The bus circled through the streets of a small southern town, a gracious town in appearance. I looked about me. It was too real for my companions, too vivid. Their faces were pinched, their expressions indrawn, as though they felt themselves being dragged down the jail stairway, felt their own heads bumping against the steps, experiencing the terror. Bill's voice cut through sourly. "That's the courthouse where they made that decision." He looked at me to see if I understood what decision he meant. I nodded. "That's where they, as much as they told the whites, 'You go ahead and lynch those niggers. We'll see you don't get into any trouble.'" I wondered what the whites in front were thinking. The lynching and the callous decision of the Pearl River County Grand Jury were surely on all their minds. Perhaps the injustice was as nightmarish to them as it was to those surrounding me. We drove through wooded countryside into the night. Bill dozed beside me, his snores adjusted to the hum of the tires. No one talked. After a while, Bill roused himself and pointed out the window. "That's where they fished his body out of the creek," he said. I cupped my hands to the window, but could only see black masses of foliage against the blue dark sky. We arrived at Hattiesburg around 8:30. Most of the Negroes hurried to the restrooms. Bill gave me instructions with such solicitude that I was alarmed. Unless there was a real danger, he would be so Why, unless there was a real danger, would he be so careful to help me avoid it? I wondered. He told me where I should go first and whom I should request to see. "What's the best way to get there?" I asked. "Have you got money?" "Yes." "Take a cab." "Where do I catch one?" "Any of those cabs out there," and he pointed to a string of parked cabs driven by white men. "You mean a white driver will take a Negro passenger?" I asked. "Yeah." "They wouldn't in New Orleans. They said they weren't allowed to." "Oh, they're allowed to do anything to get your dime," he said. We walked to one of the cabs. "Yes, sir. Where can I take you?" the driver said. I looked through the window to see a pleasant young man who showed me no hint of animosity. Bill told him the address where he should deliver me. "Wait a second. Will you?" Bill told the driver. He grabbed my arm and walked away. "I'll find out where you're staying. I'll come around noon tomorrow and check on you to see if you're all right." Again, I was overwhelmed that strangers should go to such trouble for me. I thanked him. He hesitated as though uncertain and then said, "I'm not butting into your business, but if you're planning on getting a girl, you don't want to get one that'll burn you." I sure don't. I thought of La Fontaine's Les Deux Hommes, where the friends offer to help rid the hero of his sadness by procuring him a girl for him. I detected no hint of lasciviousness in Bill's voice or manner. Certainly no element of pimping. No, he was simply trying to protect me. "If you do plan on getting one, you better let me help you find a clean one." "I'm worn out, Bill," I said. "I guess I'll bypass it tonight." "That's fine. I just didn't want you to go getting yourself all messed up." I appreciate it. The cab driver delivered me to an address on Mobile Street, the main street of the Negro Quarter. It was narrow, cluttered, lined with stores, cafes, and bars. He was completely civil and in such an authentic way, I felt it was his real nature and not just a veneer to please the customer, the way I'd seen it in the stores in New Orleans. "Looks awful wild down here," I told him as I paid. I had to speak loudly to make him hear me above the shouts and the amplified wails of the jukebox rock and roll music. "If you don't know the quarter, you better get inside somewhere as soon as you can," he said. My contact inside referred me to another person in the quarter. As I walked down Mobile Street, a car full of white boys and men sped past. They yelled obscenities at me. A cetacema, a tangerine, flew by my head and broke against the building. The street was loud and raw with tension as thick as fog. I felt the insane terror of it. When I entered the store of my second contact, we talked in low voices, though he made no effort to be guarded or cautious in expressing his contempt for the brutes who made forays into the area. "The sons of bitches beat one boy to a pulp. He was alone on a stretch of the walk. They jumped out of the car, tore him up, and were gone before anyone knew what was happening," he said. "They framed another on a trumped-up charge of carrying whiskey in his car. He's one of the finest boys in town, never drinks." His bitterness was so great, I knew I would be thought a spy for the whites if I divulged my identity. Another car soared down the street, and the street was suddenly deserted, but the Negroes appeared again shortly. I sought refuge in a Negro drugstore and drank milkshakes as an excuse to stay there. A well-dressed man approached me and asked if I were Mr. Griffin. I told him I was. He said there was a room for me and I could go to it whenever I got ready. I walked through the street again, through the darkness that was alive with lights and humanity. Blues boomed from the tavern across the street. It was a sort of infernal circus, smelling of barbecue and kerosene. My room was upstairs in a wooden shanty structure that had never known paint. It was decrepit, but the Negro leaders assured me it was safe and that they would keep a close watch on me. Without turning on my light, I went over and sat on the bed. Lights from the street cast a yellowish glow over the room. From the tavern below, a man improvised a ballad about poor Mac Parker, overcome with passion, his body in a creek. "Oh, Lord," a woman said in the quiet that followed, her voice full of sadness and awe. "Lordy, Lordy," a man in a hushed voice as though there was nothing more he could say. Canned jazz blared through the street in a monstrous high-strutting rhythm that pulled at the viscera. The board floor squeaked under my footsteps. I switched on the light and looked at a cracked piece of mirror braided with bent nails to the wall. The bald Negro stared back at me from its molten sheen. I knew I was in hell. Hell could be no more lonely or hopeless, no more agonizingly estranged from the world of order and harmony. I heard my voice as though it belonged to someone else, hollow in the empty room, detached, say, "Nigger, what are you standing up there crying for?" I saw tears slick on his cheeks in the yellow light. Then I heard myself say what I have heard them say so many times. It's not right. It's just not right. Then the onrush of revulsion, the momentary flash of blind hatred against the whites who were somehow responsible for all this. The old bewilderment of wondering, why do they do it? Why do they keep us like this? What are they gaining? What evil has taken them? The Negroes say, what sickness has taken them? My revulsion turned to grief at my own people who could give the hate stare, could shrivel men's souls, could deprive humans of rights they unhesitatingly accord their livestock. I turned away from the mirror. A burned-out light globe lay on the plank floor in the corner. Its unfrosted glass held the reflection of the overhead bulb, a speck of brightness. A half a dozen film negatives curled up around like dead leaves. I picked them up and held them before the light with strange excitement, curious to see the images that some prior occupant of this room had photographed. Each negative was blank. I imagined him going to the drugstore to pick up the packages of photos and hurrying into this squalid room to warm himself with the view of his wife, his children, his parents, his girlfriend. Who knows? He sat here holding blank negatives, masterpieces of human ingenuity wasted. I flicked the negatives, as he must have done, toward the corner, heard them scratch dryly against the wall and flap to the floor. One struck the dead globe, causing it to sing with the strange filamental music of the spheres, fragile and high-pitched tone above the outside noises. Music from the jukebox, grinding rhythm, wretched down the street. Harangity, hangity, 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 oomp, oomp, oomp. The aroma of barbecue tormented my empty insides, but I did not want to leave the room to go back into the mainstream of hell. I took out my notebook and lay across the bed on my stomach and attempted to write. Anything to escape the death dance out there in the Mississippi night. But the intimate contentment would not come. I tried to write my wife. I needed to write her, to give her my news. But I found I could tell her nothing. No words would come. She had nothing to do with this life. Nothing to do with the room in Hattiesburg, nor with its Negro inhabitant. It was maddening. All my instincts struggled against the estrangement. I began to understand Lionel Trilling's remark that culture, learned behavior patterns so deeply ingrained they produce unconscious, involuntary reactions, is a prison. My conditioning as a Negro and the immense sexual implications with which the racists in our culture bombard us cut me off, even in my most intimate self, from any connection with my wife. I stared at the letter and saw written, Hattiesburg, November 14th, my darling, followed by a blank page. The visual barrier imposed itself. The observing self saw the Negro surrounded by the sounds and smells of the ghetto, write darling to a white woman. The chains of my blackness would not allow me to go on. Though I understood and could analyze what was happening, I could not break through. Never look at a white woman, look down or the other way. What do you mean calling a white woman darling like that, boy? I went out to find some barbecue, down the outside steps, my hand on the cool weathering railing, past a man leaning forward with his head cushioned on his arm against the wall, leaning into the shadows, and onto a door somewhere. There were dim lights and signs, no obscenity allowed, and hot links, 25 cents. A round-faced woman, her cheeks slicked yellow with sweat, handed me a barbecue beef sandwich. My black hands took it from her black hands. The imprint of her thumb remained on the bread's soft pores. Standing so close, the odors of her body rose up to me from her white uniform, mingling with hickory smoked flesh, gardenia talcum, and sweat. The expression on her full face cut into me. Her eyes said with unmistakable clarity, God, isn't it awful? She took the money and stepped back into the open kitchen. I watched her lift the giant lid of the pit and fork out a great chunk of meat. White smoke billowed up, hazing her face to gray. The meat warmed through the bread in my hand. I carried the sandwich outside and sat on the back steps leading up to my room to eat it. A streak of light from the front followed me past, illuminating dusty weeds, debris, and outbuildings some distance to the rear. This night, the hoots and shouts surrounded me even in this semi-hiding place. Hangity, hangity, harangity, hangity. The music consumed in its blatant rhythm all other rhythms, even that of the heartbeat. I wondered how all of this would look to the casual observer or to the whites in their homes. The niggers are whooping it up over on Mobile Street, they might say. They're happy. Or as one scholar put it, despite their lowly status, they are capable of living jubilantly. Would they see the immense melancholy that hung over the quarter, so oppressive that men had to dull their sensibilities in the noise, or wine, or sex, or gluttony in order to escape it? The laughter had to be gloss, or it would be turned into sobs, and to sob would be to realize, and to realize would be to despair. So the noise poured forth like a jazzed-up fugue, louder and louder to cover the whisper in every man's soul. You are black. You are condemned. This is what the white man mistook for jubilant living and called whooping it up. This is how the white man can say they live like dogs, never realizing why they must, to save themselves, shout, get drunk, shake the hip, Pour pleasures into bellies deprived of happiness. I am going to stop here, guys. We're ending on the bottom of page 69. And hopefully tomorrow goes well and I'll be able to do another reading tomorrow afternoon. Please do like and subscribe. Please share my channel with people. It'd be great to be able to grow it. If you like the content, please mark a thumbs up. If you're not happy with the content on this channel, please move on. Any negative comments are going to be deleted. And yes, kind of want an echo chamber. This is not like, I do not want to even entertain white supremacists. Anybody who believes in Christian nationalism, any of that stuff. Christian nationalism is a code word for white supremacy. So that has to end. It's why I'm reading this book. So put your courage feet on, you guys, and we'll see you tomorrow night. Thank you for following my channel. Thank you for the thumbs up. Thank you for subscribing. I really appreciate everyone who comes to my channel and listens all the way to the end. Thank you. Ciao.